Motor Vessel Tosca. Motor Vessel Tosca. Vacate your engine room. Vacate your engine room. We're prepared to subject you to disabling fire.
Okay, we gave the flare. Now we're
What you just watched happened on Sunday, April 19. The U.S. Navy shot at an Iranian tanker running the American-imposed blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Today, we're going to bring you an in-depth look at what is going down in the Strait of Hormuz and why it has become ground zero for the Middle East and the world. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. All right, we're going to open this podcast with a few short clips that illustrate very clearly the tense standoff prevailing in the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is a critical waterway linking the major oil and gas producing Gulf states and Iran to the world. After vessels load up at their ports of call, they must then navigate a narrow elbow-like crook in the channel in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has decided that it will exercise full control over access and passage through the Strait of Hormuz for all maritime traffic. This is illegal, but hey, this is Iran, and it's not new. Iran has been flexing its muscle in this manner since the regime came into power in 1979. The West has given this terror regime pretty much carte blanche for 47 years now, until President Trump stepped in, and he is saying, no, this is an international maritime route, and we will not bend to your thuggish conduct. In this episode, we'll take a detailed look at what has been and is going on in the Strait of Hormuz. I interviewed retired U.S. Admiral Mark Montgomery last Thursday, and this was all we spoke about, the Strait of Hormuz. He's a fascinating man with extraordinary experience in the American Navy and military. First, though, before we get to retired Admiral Montgomery, I thought that a little background and visual introduction and an update would be helpful. So let's start with this clip from Friday, April 17th. In the hours before Iran said that it had lifted its illegal control, blockade, whatever, of the Strait of Hormuz, things were foggy, unclear exactly what was open, what was closed, on what terms, who could pass, who could not. In this clip we're about to play, you will hear the voice of a United States naval officer speaking on an open communication channel with the captain of an Iranian vessel. Iran had decided unilaterally that the strait was open, but it was open on Iran's terms. And America's response? Well, that's not how this works, guys.
This is U.S. Navy Warship 115. Request you return to original port of call in Iran. How copy? Over.
Copy, sir. Thank you very much. Copy, sir. Me alter to Iran. Thank you.
Blue Sky 4, this is U.S. Warship 115. I understand you will return to your previous port of call in Iran. This is U.S. Warship 115, standing by on channel 16. Out.
Throughout Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, tensions eased, tensions spiked, and spiked, and spiked. I'm going to highlight now just a few key events. There are many more. Saturday, April 18th. Iran insisted that the Strait of Hormuz was free and open to all maritime traffic, except that, as always with the Islamic Republic of Iran, it wasn't that simple. The strait was sort of open, on terms dictated unilaterally by Iran, which were not acceptable to the United States of America, as well as many Middle Eastern nations and others. They've had it with Iranian extortion and criminal conduct. Curiously, it's the Western liberal democracies, the ones that should be the beacons of moral clarity, that are kowtowing to Iranian terms. The United Kingdom, France, Canada, and others. For shame. Here's a recent statement by Dr. Sultan Ahmed Al Jaber, Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology in the UAE, and also the head of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, known more commonly as NDOC. And he states the following: 50 days of a closed Hormuz, almost 600 million barrels of oil blockaded so far, 50 days of mounting pressure on LNG, jet fuel, fertilizer, and the essentials that the world depends on. Behind every missing barrel, bills go up for ordinary people everywhere. The global economy cannot afford more uncertainty. The Strait cannot operate under threat. And let's call payment for safe passage what it is: a protection racket. Hormuz belongs to the world. It must be returned to the world exactly as it was. Close quote. That's a pretty unequivocal statement of support for American action from a senior leader and figure in the UAE. It's also a very clear denunciation of the Iranian regime and its conduct. And there's more. It is impossible to keep up with all the twists and turns. But things really heated up on Sunday after President Trump threatened to destroy any Iranian naval craft that attacked commercial or other ships in the Strait or nearby area. And, well, what do you know? Iran did just that. First, there was the attack on an Indian merchant vessel. This vessel had been granted passage by the Iranian Navy and was then attacked by the Iranian Navy. You're going to hear a clip now that records the voice of the captain of that Indian vessel, understandably panicked, pleading with the Iranian Navy to stop shooting.
Sepa Navy, this is Motorangastan Marhadal. You gave me clearance to go. My name second on your list. You gave me clearance to go. You are fighting now. Let me turn back.
Following that incident, the war of words between Iran and America heated up again. Last Thursday, before all of the events we just reviewed had occurred, I spoke with retired United States Admiral Mark Montgomery, who served more than 30 years with the American Navy. He knows the terrain well and pulls no punches. This is a fantastic discussion. Enjoy. It's Thursday, April 16th, about 3:15 in the afternoon in Israel. It's a hot one, too. It's about 35 degrees here today. And pleasure to welcome you, retired Admiral Mark Montgomery, 35 plus years of service with the United States Navy. Thank you so much for joining State of Tel Aviv and Beyond today.
Vivian, thank you very much for having me today. Glad to be here, coming from a sweltery Taipei, Taiwan.
You're in Taipei. What time is it there?
We're +5 from you, so 2015.
Military time. I love it. I use military time all the time. You've had an extraordinary career. We were just going over the highlights, and I think it would take most people a few lifetimes to manage to do what you've done. But the super highlights, if I may be a little reductionist, are in the last decade or so of your career. You were an admiral. You were a commander of one of these large naval ships that, of course, we all see on TV all the time now. And as well, you commanded a carrier strike group. I got that right?
You did. You got all of it.
Excellent. So for the benefit of people who did not have the remedial course that I did before we turned on record today, just tell us, what is a command strike group?
Yeah, so carrier strike group has an aircraft carrier, usually 7 or 8 squadrons of strike fighters and helicopters, and 5 or 6 ships that are aligned with it. Usually when I had it, because I was forward deployed to Japan, I'd have sometimes 2 carriers, 2 sets of air wings, up to about 20 destroyers. So I'd have anywhere from 10 or 11,000 to 20,000 people, sailors and airmen kind of working for me, almost always at sea. And it was a lot of fun, a lot of responsibility. And in our Navy, it's probably the pinnacle job at sea.
It's extraordinary. I mean, as you know, we've all been paying a lot of attention recently because of all the activity in the Middle East and just the thought of the floating cities, right? As you're saying, 10, 20,000 people, extraordinary capabilities. I don't even want to think about the logistics of feeding and cleaning and ensuring that everybody has what they need so that they can then go and do the very complex jobs that they're there to perform. And you've also spent much of your career working all over the world, but in particular, you've spent a fair bit of time in Israel and also in the Middle East. Just tell us a bit about what you've engaged in the region.
Thanks. So just as a Navy officer, I've probably done 20 deployments, 18, 19, 20 deployments, and I'd say at least 10 were to the Middle East, where I would go and operate either in the Arabian Gulf eventually, but sometimes in the North Arabian Sea, on either carriers or destroyers or cruisers. So transiting back and forth through the Straits of Hormuz probably 40 plus times, including some where I was escorting convoys early in my career, some where we accidentally were, adjacent to or in minefields. And then a lot of those were in combat conditions, after 2001 particularly. Then as an admiral, one of my first jobs, I had about a 3-year stint at U.S. European Command, where, among a lot of other things, one of my responsibilities was the day-to-day kind of military to military cooperation with Israel, and particularly, the Israeli Defense Force. But as a result, I traveled there probably 20 times over 3 years, and have since, in different, either working for the Senate or working in cyber or working for the think tank Foundation for the Democracies, I'm at another 10 or 15 times. So I've had a reasonable amount of trips to Israel at this point.
Yeah, you sounds like you get around it for a bit. And of course, you referred to General Gantz and your familiarity with him, who is much better known these days as Benny Gantz, a political figure who sits in the Knesset and aspires to be prime minister. He, too, has had a very storied career. So, Mark, I want to really dig into the Strait of Hormuz. Everybody knows where it is now, and it's this, kind of bizarrely shaped choke point leading into the Persian Gulf. I believe it's 16 miles wide as its widest. Is that correct?
It can be a little wider than at different points, but 16 miles is a good metric for where you're most challenged. It gets to about 21 miles wide, and then it really opens up on either side. It's a tough strait. We spent the last 3 years in the U.S. Navy worrying about the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, going into the Red Sea, where the Houthis were firing missiles out. So
Right.
We've been thinking about straits and commercial ships pretty aggressively for the last 3 years in the U.S. Navy, and we've shot down a ton of Iranian ballistic missiles and cruise missiles and Shahed drones that they had provided to the Houthis, who were using them to shoot at either the U.S. Navy warships or merchant ships. So we kind of had a taste of it. We knew exactly what it was. But what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz is different because a much more capable adversary in a much tighter geography with no other opportunity for transit. In other words, if you're in the Arabian Gulf, you need to get out to the Straits. Whereas Bab el-Mandeb, you can go around Africa should you choose to. So this is a much different, much harder case, but one that I'm confident Fifth Fleet, which is our naval fleet and Central Command, and U.S. Central Command itself, commanded by Admiral Bragg Cooper, we're thinking about.
So glad that the Houthis are sitting out for the most part this round. The Strait of Hormuz, you know it well. The U.S. Navy and military have been studying it, as you've indicated, for some time. And it serves as probably the most important passageway for oil tankers and natural gas. And I know there are other resources that pass through on tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. The most important in terms of supplying the global market. So, first of all, explain, please, geographically, what the ships have to do to navigate it, because even if it's 20 miles wide, give or take, my understanding is that only maximum 4 miles are used for shipping lanes. So you've already got that constraint. And my understanding as well is that it is under international law, it is an international waterway. Yet what we've seen in the last few weeks is that the Islamic Republic of Iran has assumed control over the strait. So just fill us in on what it's like getting in and out and how, under international law, Iran can do this, or is it just that they do it?
So give you the picture for the straits. Let's say we're going from outside the straits to inside into the Arabian Gulf to go pick up fossil fuels. And you're right. What we pick up there are what's picked up by merchants are lots of things, but the three that really get people nervous are oil, liquefied natural gas, LNG, and fertilizers. And they're big percentages, 20% of the global oil supply, for example, things like that. So a container ship, a very large ship, a couple million barrels of oil, but it's coming in empty. It comes up through the North Arabian Sea, enters a transit scheme, 40 or 50 miles short of the straits, which means get on the right. There's no markings in the water. It's a
Right.
GPS located thing, but you can see ships very clearly adhere to it, get on the right side or left side of it if they're entering or leaving. And they go up. And then there, where it gets sporty and it starts to thin is as you approach the hairpin turn, it gets tight and it squeezes down from 21 miles to about 16 miles in there. That international waters normally for a country, for Iran and Oman, the two countries on either side of that hairpin, will be 12 miles. But as you noted, it's a considered international waterway that allows for transit passage through by merchant ships. So the ship then very clearly at that point in a much narrower transit path sticks to the right side or left side of the channel and bends through the hairpin, and it comes out and 10 to 15 miles later enters a transit scheme on the other side. And you go through that transit scheme because you can't just have the flow of traffic just jam in at the very top. Ironically, in the past, in the 1980s and 90s, the Iranians have mined the areas somewhat south of the straits in those transit schemes on the inside, on the Arabian Gulf side, closing in on Bahrain's port almost. So just as near Manama. And so that just tells you that the Iranians treat that whole area as a place they can hold at risk. My whole career, a transit's been considered a high-risk evolution. A little bit because of the navigation, but mostly because of the threat from Iran. And the threat from Iran is traditionally three things. They could shoot cruise missiles at you. These are missiles that go 500, 600 miles an hour. So it has an ability to hit a ship that's not equipped to shoot it down or not prepared. Certainly a merchant wouldn't be prepared or equipped to shoot it down. Those cruise missiles, they had hundreds of them or thousands almost. I think we did a very good job removing those and their launchers. They have a much smaller number. And once it's in small numbers, something you can handle. That was the first thing that worried you. The second thing that worried you was fast attack craft that would come out and harass you with machine gun fire or rocket propelled grenades. And they've done that to all kinds of American ships and merchant ships. They've killed a lot of merchant sailors. They haven't killed American sailors doing that, but they've been harassing. And they started to experiment with unmanned versions of those before the Ukrainians did. And they have a number of them. Those we've been chewing up pretty heavily with both bombing campaigns, but also when they get out in the water, the A-10s come by and sink them, or armed helicopters do. So we've been removing a lot of them. Then the third thing that worried you was mines that could be laid. And we'll talk about those in some more detail later, I think. But, they had thousands of mines. I think we removed thousands of mines, just not all thousands they had. So they have some left. And we used to worry about their surface ships coming out, their frigates and corvettes coming out and harassing you. We don't anymore because those were all sunk, as were their limited number of submarines, so that we're able to get in the water. So that threat's gone. And then a new threat emerged over the last 2 years, and that's the Shahed drone being fired out at merchant ships. Now, Shahed drone at a Navy ship, U.S. Navy ship, isn't going to be a hard thing, but you might waste a really good missile on it. Unless you got it with your aircraft that can shoot it really cheaply, you might expend a missile. But there are literally tens of thousands of those Shahed drones, and so that was the problem. So all those kind of things added up to challenges that you have to eliminate before you start safely bringing merchant ships through. So that's what we would always worry about when you build like a safety plan for going through or escorting someone through. That's how you would build your safety plan.
So when you talk about these Shahed drones, of which there are many thousands, kind of coming at one of these enormous, Navy ships of America, that's kind of classic asymmetrical warfare, is it not?
It is. Now, the Shahed drones do much better on land attack because the GPS coordinates don't change, right? What you're launching at, an airfield, a desalination plant, electrical power grid, doesn't move. And you can fire from almost anywhere in Iran to almost any kind of land site in the Arabian, peninsula. And it's very hard for defenders to have aircraft up to shoot those all down because it's such a wide path. By the way, when you fire 300 or 400 Shaheds at Israel, the U.S. Air Force gets up behind them and begins to pick them off with their rockets called Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System, which is a very cheap, like $25,000 rocket. Shoots down a Shahed that costs more than $25,000, so good return on investment. And we could shoot down 100 to 200. Then the Israeli Air Force, maybe with some help with the Jordanians, usually just the Israeli Force, gets behind and shoots down the rest. And so the couple of times they shot a big load of Shaheds at Israel, they never got through. I mean, I think either 0 or 1 got into, Israeli airspace, to be handled by a Iron Dome. Not necessary when you have a lot of time like that. Shaheds lose versus aircraft when you got a lot of space. So if you're with ships in this Arabian Gulf, 10, 20 miles away from land, that is not a lot of space. So drones would have a role. Now, so the United States, as we started to think about, okay, we're going to eventually have to convoy escort through the Strait of Hormuz, and we're removing the missiles, we're removing the drones, we're removing the mines, the small attack craft. One thing I think about with the Shahed drones is eventually they're going to have some, and we're going to have combat air patrol over Iran that can zip in behind a drone and shoot it down over Iran before it gets out to sea over the ships, to get at the ships. Or our ships will have to be very close to the merchant ship so we can provide covering fire for them, overlapping fire.
So is this scenario you're describing now, Mark, is this what the U.S. Navy and military are looking at today? Or has this been an ongoing kind of concern?
So it was an ongoing concern. I think from the very beginning, whether they had the right strategic, objectives, I'm sure you've had a few podcasts on that, to discuss whether regime change was ever really in play. Their military objectives were pretty clear. And destroy the ballistic missiles in their production, destroy the drones in their production, destroy the nuclear program, kill key leadership, destroy their maritime capability and its production. So they can't do these things for 3, 4, 5 years. One of them was removing all those things in the maritime environment so that you could do the convoys. We always knew the convoys would be hard, not because our Navy ships won't do them. We've had Navy ships go through over the last 3 or 4 days. The problem is you got to convince a merchant ship, not the captain who's probably itching to leave, but the owner of the ship who has several $1 million, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars invested in the ship, and even more sometimes in the cargo.
Yeah. And I've been trying to get a reinsurance expert. I used to actually work in that field in my days as a lawyer. So I know the Lloyd's of London scene.
Yeah.
I've yet to find someone who's willing to speak publicly about the insurance issue.
It's the shipbuilder plus the insurer. And then the insurers look at something called the Joint War Council, which Lloyd's kind of hand puppets, I think, out of London. I mean, there's a group of them in it, but I think Lloyd's services it. And they kind of say, well, that area is not safe, or the rates can go up this much, or that, it's listed or not listed, things like that. So the United States Navy was going to have to create the conditions where those groups of people, the Joint War Council, the insurers, the shipbuilders, and the ship captains, said it's safe to transit. And that was taking time. I would say that was one of the longest polls in the strike tent, that we were having, because when you say we're going to remove their ballistic missiles in production, maybe it's get 90% of them. But when you say I'm going to make it safe for convoy operations, I have to remove the maritime capability, we mean like 99%, 98%. So that if something's fired, it's a one-off. They can be easily handled by the forces. And it can't be like a swarm of drones or a swarm of missiles or a swarm of fast attack craft that might overwhelm the localized defenses. So that's kind of what we were working on, I think, weeks 3, 4, 5, 6 of the bombing campaign. And I don't think we were there. I think we were very close enough that those ships could transit the other day, but not so close that we thought we could convince merchants to go through.
And I understand their hesitation, the merchants, I have to say. So I want to talk a bit about mines, Mark. We hear a lot about the straits being mined, and you've mentioned that Iran has been engaging in this exercise, behavior, conduct for many years, especially kind of around Bahrain, Manama, and their port. What do we know? How long has Iran been laying mines, and do we have any idea? And if we don't, how do we locate them?
So, well, they've been laying mines since about 1986, on and off. But more recently, I think they probably thought about laying mines someday around day 3 of the combined air attack from Israel and U.S., when they realized this is going to hurt and we're going to lose a lot of things. Now, look, they weren't laying a minefield in accordance with the Hague Convention, marking things, blah, blah, blah. They were out there probably at night. I mean, Vivian, you and I could place one mine probably between us. We could get a trolley and probably get one mine in a small boat, get the boat out there, drop it. Now, we'd probably be killed doing it by an American attack aircraft, but you might be able to get one mine out there. They laid, allegedly, now Admiral Cooper has not acknowledged this, but they laid, 10 to 12 mines of, either bottom mines or tethered mines, not floating mines, in the straits, somewhere in the transit lanes. Probably not biased towards the Iranian side, would be my guess. And so we're going to have to go find those. Now, when you kind of know where they're, if you saw the ships, if you're reviewing video and you're like, okay, that looks like it might be that gives you a big head start. Having a general idea how many and the geographic location of where they entered the water, get started, and you might be able to clear these mines pretty rapidly. If all you're doing is clearing a path that says, I don't know if there's mines over here and over there, but there's no mines right here, that can be done pretty rapidly. That's a days to week thing. The first one I mentioned is a weeks to month thing. When you're actually clearing them, it's weeks to month and that proves you have enough assets, 3, 4, 5 assets. And the U.S. has 3 of its newer littoral combat ships, which have never been tested, which were expensive and delivered late. But I would remind you that expensive and delivered late was highly criticized by Elon Musk when he called the F-35 a dinosaur. The day after he called the F-35 a dinosaur, back in October 2025, or 2024, the Israeli F-35s kind of removed all Iranian air defense systems in a nighttime of strike. So, being late and over budget does not mean you're not good. The F-35 is, by any practical definition, good. So maybe the littoral combat ships system will be good. And what they are is they're ships that launch a helicopter that mine hunts, and then a unmanned autonomous ship that sweeps and clears mines. And we have 3 of those somewhere in the Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean. We also have 2 more traditional, timey, like 50-year-old minesweepers coming with their gear. They're passing through Singapore about now, so be on station in a week or 2. This is what our allies probably could have helped us with if President Trump had spent the last 14 months treating them like friends and partners instead of pariahs. The UK, the French, the Norwegians, the Swedes, the Dutch, the Polish, the Baltics, they all have pretty good minesweeping. Their ships are a long way away and they go slow. But if we'd asked them on day 2 or 3 and we treated them properly ahead of time, they might be there. But we didn't ask, and the president has treated them poorly, which is probably why he didn't ask, over Greenland and other things. So as a result, right now we'd be alone. The other countries that might be able to help her, sometimes I think the Australians can help, but then I find out their navy's just got almost no operational oomph in it. The Japanese and Koreans could absolutely help, but neither one of them likes to get too involved in somebody else's war.
As a Canadian, I have to ask, does Canada have any competency that would be helpful in this environment?
Not they could get there at any time. But I do need to mention that Carney's, bravado in general should have been said by someone in Europe, maybe the president of Poland, whose country has been spending 4 to 5% of GDP on defense for the last decade. Not a laggard like Canada, who has spent the last 30 years under-resourcing defense and relying on the United States to a crippling degree, that your Navy almost is not functionless. It can do things, but it's in a real hurt locker. Your Air Force is in a hurt locker. The things that need a lot of money to operate. Not that they're not fantastic sailors, airmen and soldiers. It's that they've been grossly underfunded by consecutive governments that thought 1.2, 1.3% was enough for defense. That's called freeloading. So when you freeload off of one country for 30 years, and that country's next president turns out to be kind of a jackass who calls you out on it and mocks you, the actual response to that is keep your mouth shut and encourage the Poles who are not freeloaders to say, hey, sir, you might be a little off base here. But that's not Carney's MO. And he's given speeches like, he was Churchill at Dunkirk.
In his mind, he is. When you say, you make reference to, Carney's bravado, I'm thinking, which one? As we have an embarrassment of riches from the prime minister. Okay, back to mines. How big is a mine? How big is a mine that goes into the sea?
The smaller ones are about a refrigerator. They get a little bit bigger than that. They're no longer like the World War I mine that, that cartoonists use, with like horns.
Right.
But although, believe it or not, Iran has some of those. That was a small percentage, though. The vast majority are tethered to the bottom. So there's a mine at 100, 200, 300 feet on a anchor line to a heavy weight that holds it there suspended in the water, where it, through magnetic sensors or acoustic sensors or pressure sensors, feels a large vessel pass by. It activates the mine. The mine releases the equivalent of a torpedo that goes and strikes the ship. It can have something called a ship counter, where it detects one and says, I'm not going. Detects another one, says, I'm not going. But on the third one goes, or the ninth one goes. And then there's some that lay on the bottom, even harder to detect. They have a higher failure rate or a harder time sometimes detecting the vessels, but they're highly successful as well. And again, they release a torpedo that goes up and strikes the merchant ship. So different types of mines, different sizes. They're big because they encapsulate within them a sensor for detection and a torpedo.
So we believe that the Iranians have laid a number of these mines. What did you say? Remind me of the number.
I think the Iranians have laid somewhere between 7 and 12 mines. That's the kind of whisper campaign that's going on that usually comes from intel sources.
So they've laid between 7 and 12 mines. What we do know, or think we know, is that at the most recent face-to-face between America and Iran in Islamabad, that the Iranians came and were like, yeah, we did lay some mines, but geez, we don't know where. We kind of lost track. Do you give that any credibility, that statement?
Potentially. If you told me they laid mines, they knew where they were, and they lied to us about it, I'd believe it. And if you told me they laid mines, they didn't know where they were, and they told us the truth about it, I'd believe that statement. I believe another one where they laid mines, don't know where they are, but say they do. I don't trust the regime for anything. I'd have to check that the sun came up if they told me. But on top of it, I do kind of believe they laid mines and don't know where they are.
Okay, so they laid mines, don't know where they are. Let's work with that assumption. President Trump's claims that all of their ships and Navy, aside from the smaller vessels, which we'll get to in a moment, that they're all at the bottom of the sea. Is that true?
I think 96, 98%. They may have a ship or two that was in a maintenance, so it's kind of sitting broken in a dry dock right now. But all the rest are gone.
Okay, so Iran decides, without any real kind of offensive enforcement capability, naval-based, Iran decides we're going to block the Strait of Hormuz, right? We're going to choke off global oil supply. And it's bold, and the whole world freaks out, understandably. Legally, isn't that an act of aggression?
You're not supposed to block an international waterway like that. And you certainly aren't allowed to block it and then only allow certain ships through that pay a tariff.
We'll get to that.
But so
okay.
Yes, that's the first step of illegal behavior, but yes.
Okay. So because I've not seen or heard this covered, in my view, maybe I've just missed it, but I've not seen or heard it covered really well. And this is why I really want to go through this with you kind of step by step. So America steps up and says, what you're doing is just not cool under international law. It is, in effect, an act of aggression. And we're going to blockade your blockade. Now, I'll make an overly simplistic statement that, much of the mainstream media then goes crazy and says, oh my God, America, you can't blockade the strait. But isn't a counter blockade or a kind of, defensive blockade a different beast? Help us,
Yeah.
give us
So
some context for this.
I think what we're doing is blockading their ports in response to their selective blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. They're doing a selective blockade that says if a ship is just going from an Iranian port to someplace not blocked, if a ship is being transited by a country who we don't dislike, it could go through. If it's going by one we don't dislike but we think is rich, we'll toll them. And if it's from a country we don't like, then it can't go through. That's a very selective blockade they've had. And by the way, in my mind, the ships who participate in that, look, I know maritime law doesn't have RICO, co-conspiracy, acts in them, but they are effectively enabling that criminal behavior by paying toll or paying the toll or participating in the selective blockade. And so what the United States said is, we're going to blockade your ports so that your Iranian oil isn't delivered by shadow fleet ships or other ships to mostly India and China by telling any ship trying to come out, turn back. Any ship you allowed through, we're turning back. They either came from an Iranian port or they paid a tariff, or excuse me, a toll. And by the way, they paid the toll, I think, through like a payment into a Cayman's account. As we know, the IRGC is a vast criminal conspiracy to rob Iran, to bleed it dry of all its funds. In addition, it does this kind of criminal behavior. And so telling me that the IRGC had easy access to Cayman accounts and Bitcoin and all that, I believe it. They were doing this already before we were started. So, they're continuing, they're just using the account numbers they had on file. So that's what they're doing. Our counter blockade is a blockade of Iranian ports to prevent their oil from getting out. And by the way, much of that stuff we're blockading is already sanctioned, by various UN or other sanctions over the last 5 to 7 years.
So my understanding is that the Iranian regime has been trading primarily, as you say, in Cayman accounts, but the currencies they use are crypto and the Chinese currency, the yuan.
Yeah.
And that's really the basis of their commerce. The other aspect of this kind of responsive blockade or blockade of a kind of selective blockade by America was President Trump announced, and any ships that do pass through, we will interdict.
Yep.
Meaning we will stop them, we will board them. And that's kind of, in sync with your point saying that, they're kind of co-conspirators if they are playing along with what is a criminal regime. The other thing that the Iranians have threatened is to use those really cool boats. Maybe they're corvettes, those kind of like very sleek motorboats, but they're huge. And they've been using those to go buzz up against some commercial tankers, but also even, I think they got quite close to some American Navy ships. What kind of threat do those represent?
Those have to be destroyed. So if one got close, I think our warning distance on that would be pretty far. Then an A-10 would destroy them, or an armed helicopter, and that would not be even combat. So my personal opinion is a limited use of a fast attack craft is going to, or a small unmanned fast attack craft is going to have marginal play here. Now, if they got 20 or 30 of them together and we didn't strike them ashore when they were assembling, which we would do, unblinking eye sees, hey, a whole bunch of, trucks with trailers are pulling up to dump ships we hadn't seen before into the water. That whole little melange of trucks, trailers, and ships would be getting a lot of JDAMs and JASMs and everything else we have piled in on them. That would not be a healthy place to be. So I don't think that's going to happen easily now. It was happening 10, 20, 30 days ago. It might even happen a couple days ago in a very short run against a merchant. But I don't think it's happening against U.S. Navy ships these days. I'm not sure the Iranians knew the 2 U.S. Navy ships went through until after we told them they went through. I'll put my money on that.
The countries that have passed through since the blockade actually has been imposed by America, my understanding is nothing's passed through. But before that, the vessels that were being allowed to on a selected basis, they were taking oil and natural gas and other things to which countries?
Through predominantly India and China, who are the major recipients of shadow fleet oil and gas. And by the way, have for 3 or 4 years now, because of the Ukraine war, massively profited because Iran and Russia had to sell oil and natural gas at well below market rates when they're doing it with the shadow fleet. So if those two countries feel a little pain right now, my empathy meter's pegged low.
The word is, and I'm sure you've heard similar things to what I have, is that there's a quiet agreement between the United States and China with respect to just kind of lying low and allowing this to play itself out. I mean, because it's incomprehensible that China's not flexing any muscle. What do you say about that?
So China was ready for this. They have a ton of stowage of oil and LNG, and also they're, as opposed to other Asian economies, not as dependent. They've built a healthy amount of coal plants during all this climate change work. They've built quite a bit of nuclear plants. They have other renewables. I mean, they've done some dam work that would make you cry, but does produce a lot of power. So they have other assets. So they're not as in extremis as, and won't be, as Indonesia, Malaysia are already becoming, and Japan, Korea, Taiwan could be in July or August if this were extended. So my gut reaction is, I don't know if there's an unstated agreement or just like a recognition in China that, hey, we want that thing to happen on 14, 15 May. Let's, that's a summit between Xi and Trump. Let's get this over with. This Iran war. Let's let it play out.
It's been quite something how quiet Prime Minister Modi of India has been.
Yeah.
I haven't heard a peep out of him.
Well, the two of them don't want to look, Modi and Xi don't want to look like, hey, we're the profiteers on this.
Right.
And eventually, even the European press will get around to that storyline.
So, Mark, just to kind of wrap this up, basically, we've got a situation where Iran has taken control of this very sensitive water passage, the Strait of Hormuz, through which so much oil, liquid natural gas passes. And they don't actually, other than these 7 to 12 mines floating around in there, they don't really have the capacity to do anything offensively from a military perspective to kind of enforce this blockade.
If we were doing a convoy, in other words, if a merchant ship just said on their own, we're going, that'd be sporty, because all they got to do is let one drone go or let one missile go or let one fast attack craft, and it somehow gets through. And we're not there defending it. But if we set up the conditions for a convoy with constant overhead combat air patrol, F-15s, F-16s, F-18s, constant A-10 fast attack, persistent air defense destroyers, all running, they could not stop that. But we can believe that the risk is low enough to do that. You have to convince the merchant ships. And right now the merchant ships don't believe that until we make Iran say, I mean, what has to happen at these negotiations is we have to do something about the nuclear, and I've even talked to one of the many other experts about the nuclear program and pickaxe and all that. But separately about Hormuz, they have to say, you know what, we're not blocking it. And then we'll say, they're not blocking it because we punched them in the nose and said, don't block it. And they'll say, their storyline will be, we're not blocking it out of a choice of our own, out of our willingness to be transparent for the international, some kind of line. And we'll both agree we're right. And then we'll move on from that.
It's quite extraordinary, though, really, that it reduces to this 7 to 12 mines. I understand it. I'm not being critical of the merchant, ship owners or the sailors for not wanting to pass through. But it is extraordinary when you look at America has 50,000-ish sailors and military personnel in the region. And the world is frozen because of this very small number of mines. Just before, hang on, the minesweeper thing. So let's just say everybody kind of got together and they said, all right, we're coming down, we're bringing our minesweepers. I'm assuming that they would kind of grid off the Gulf and go through it like that to clear it.
Two ways to do it. You could clear it, or you could indicate a safe passage.
Right.
Passage takes days to a week. We have the ships to do that. Clear all of it would take weeks to months, unless the Iranians suddenly found their map they laid them with. So my take is, and again, you're right, we have, 50,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines around there. It's safe for the U.S. Navy to go through. I mean, there's a risk, but we safely are going back and forth. I think we're very close to being able to tell the merchants it's safe. You can come through. They're not going to choose to go through because their risk isn't based on their experience of defending themselves in combat for decades. It's based on I'm sitting on several $100 million worth of cargo and plant, in the ship, and I'm not willing to risk it because Admiral Cooper says it's okay. I'll wait it out until J.D. Vance and his counterpart get a better deal.
All right. So I have to ask you, what do you think is going to happen?
I think J.D. Vance and his counterpart are going to get a deal. I think this is killing. The Iranian economy got pummeled by U.S. and Israel. They had one thing going for them. We did not hit their fossil fuel production or shipment. And they could ship about $14 to $15 billion a month to $300 billion a year that they desperately need. Except, as we know, for the last 3 days, that number has been zero, and it will maintain. Look, a ship or two will get through. I'm sure of it, if we did this for months. Okay, noted. The vast majority are deterred. Plus, if you get through and we board you, you're never seeing that ship again. You're in violation. You're probably in violation of sanctions. Once you're a criminal actor, you're not real good at keeping the IMO, International Maritime Organization regulations. So we're going to find 1,000 things wrong with your ship. Right. Any good lawyer, any good prosecutor, by the time that court case goes up, there'll be 100 charges. And you're guilty on all of them. You're going to forfeit your cargo, forfeit your vessel. And so that's deterrence. So my gut reaction is the Iranians are going to need some relief from this. I get it. They're resilient. I don't think they're resilient in the face of nothing. Plus, again, not a good reason. I don't want to get into all of it. I know there's hagiography about them in Europe right now and a complete amnesia about 32,000 people getting executed in a weekend. But okay, eventually, if the Iranians keep preventing this from moving forward, they'll have a lot of pressure on them. And I think we're going to get a solution. I'll bet we get it in the next week.
Yeah, because the other thing is they've managed until now to pay their IRGC and besiege the kind of thug enforcers on the street. They've managed to keep their paychecks flowing. But apparently, who knows, because I wasn't in the room, but when the team came back from Islamabad, Pezeshkian, the president, is not terribly powerful, but he had a bit of a meltdown saying, we're out of money in a few days. We can't pay these guys. And once we can't pay the IRGC and the besiege, it's over. The worm turns. The regime eats itself. Any parting thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it turns out the IRGC are altruistic leaders who take their Cayman accounts and turn them back to the people. Yeah, okay, I think we know that's not going to happen. So in the absence of one thing about thug autocracies, they need money, right?
Yes, they do.
People don't sign up for that quality of life unless you're paying them, right? Unless you're paying them. And look, we messed up in starting this war without having an armed insurgency on the ground. I think we'd eventually have an armed insurgency on the ground if the payment stopped.
All right. Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired Admiral Mark Montgomery, thank you so much for your time, thoughts. I have to say I could keep going, but we all have commitments to make and keep. Fascinating discussion. And I really appreciate you sharing your experience about the Strait of Hormuz and everything that goes with it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me, Vivian. It was a real pleasure.
At the time of this recording, 2 p.m. in Israel on Monday, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the status of everything is volatile and fluid. Talks in Pakistan are off. Tensions are soaring. And following the U.S. seizure of the Iranian vessel that we discussed earlier, Iran has since attacked U.S. Navy ships in the Gulf. The 2-week ceasefire between America and Iran expires imminently, and the likelihood of a resumption of full-on war is, I'm going to go crazy here and predict, highly likely. Why? Because it simply goes against every fiber of the ideology and DNA of the Iranian regime, who, at their core, are extremists. Even the moderates are extremists. It goes against everything they believe in to accept any restraint on their hegemonic Islamist ambitions. It's simply that simple, as in not complicated. I don't think that they are capable of accepting restraint. I leave you with the best video I could find online of the Iranian retaliation on the U.S. Navy vessels.
Iran responds swiftly with force, escalating tensions after the US seizure of its vessel. Iranian forces strike back with drones targeting American naval assets in a rapid retaliation. The vessel was disabled by gunfire before US troops boarded and took control. Tehran denounces the action as unlawful aggression just as the fragile truce nears expiry. The escalation raises serious concerns over collapsing diplomacy and a potential return to open conflict.
Thanks as always for being here. Please like, love, share, support our work. Every premium subscriber is critical in helping us to continue to deliver the content that you value and which we work hard to create. At sundown tonight, it's Memorial Day in Israel. It begins. And it continues until sundown on Tuesday. We remember, and this year, as does every year, it feels a little more painful than ever. As is the tradition in Israel, and has been since 1948, we then move, jarringly, from the somberness of remembrance to what is meant to be a joyful celebration of the country's existence, independence. I know that this year, as has been the case with every year since October 7th in particular, will be conflicted. Joy is in short supply these days, but we are here, and that's something to celebrate. So I'm going to sign off and start with that. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to vivian@stateoftelaviv.com. That's VIVIAN @stateoftelaviv.com. And if you go to our website, stateoftelaviv.com, you can find the subscribe button and take it from there. Hope that you do that. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything. Thank you, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team, and thank you, listeners.